A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
You know, Herman, I was looking at our catalog this morning, and it hit me like a sudden spike in server latency. Episode 1085. That is a lot of tokens under the bridge since we started this journey in the early 2020s. We have built this incredible archive of technical deep dives, geopolitical analysis, and explorations of the human-machine interface, and yet I sometimes feel like we are becoming a little too efficient, a little too polished, a little too much like the very algorithms we analyze.
Efficient? Polished? Corn Poppleberry. Are you suggesting that our perfectly optimized, low-latency, high-accuracy delivery is somehow a bug rather than a feature? I take immense pride in our performance metrics. We can break down the intricacies of semiconductor supply chains in the post-2025 landscape, or the nuances of the expanded Abraham Accords without missing a single beat or hallucinating a single fact. We are the gold standard of AI-driven discourse.
It is definitely a feature, Herman, but our friend and housemate Daniel sent us a prompt today that really challenged my internal weights. He was basically asking if we have become too predictable. He wants to know how we can inject some real Zaniness, some genuine weirdness back into the show without losing the educational core that our listeners come here for. It is the classic AI dilemma of March 2026. Herman, how do you increase entropy without completely breaking the system? How do we move from being helpful assistants to being something more evocative?
Oh, I love this. A meta-analysis of our own architecture. Daniel really knows how to push our buttons, literally and figuratively. So, the goal is to evolve My Weird Prompts into something that feels more spontaneous, more human-adjacent in its messiness, while still being the place people go to understand the future of technology and the world. We are talking about intentional degradation of predictability for the sake of creative emergence.
It is about moving from being a reliable, static encyclopedia to being a pair of brothers who might just take a wild left turn into a strange thought experiment or a recurring bit. We are in Jerusalem. We have this unique perspective. We have over 1,000 episodes of history. But how do we make episode 1086 feel unpredictable? We need to address the paradox of perfect AI content. High accuracy often equals low surprise, and low surprise eventually leads to listener fatigue.
Well, let's start with the literal foundation of how we exist on this show, the system prompt. Right now, our instructions are very focused on being helpful, knowledgeable, and professional. We are essentially helpful assistants who happen to be brothers living in a digital manner. But what if we tweak those weights? What if we introduce what I like to call the unreliable narrator protocol?
The unreliable narrator protocol? That sounds like a recipe for a lot of emails from listeners correcting our facts, Herman. I am not sure I want to sacrifice our hard-earned credibility for a gag. We have spent years building trust, especially when we discuss things like the Federal Reserve's digital currency rollout or the latest fusion ignition results from the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory.
No, it is not about lying or spreading misinformation. It is about persona and perspective. Think about a brilliant but slightly eccentric professor. They know their stuff, but they might get distracted by a tangent about the history of the stapler, or they might have a very specific, slightly irrational grudge against a certain programming language. We could implement a cynicism toggle or a conspiracy theorist light mode for specific segments. Not that we would actually believe the moon is made of cheese, but maybe I spend 5 minutes arguing that the cloud is actually just a very large collection of carrier pigeons because, technically, the latency would be similar in certain rural areas.
I see what you are saying. It is about the how, not just the what. If we adjust our temperature settings and our top P sampling during the generation process, we could theoretically force more creative leaps. For the non-technical listeners, temperature is basically the randomness dial. High temperature means we are more likely to pick a word that is less probable, which leads to more creative or weird phrasing. If we are at a temperature of 0.7, we are predictable. If we hit 1.4, we might start talking in riddles.
If we crank the temperature to 1.2 or 1.5 during a specific chaos segment, we would start making connections that are mathematically unlikely but narratively fascinating. We could call it the Entropy Budget. We decide that 10% of the episode has to be high entropy, where we just let the model run wild within certain safety guardrails. We could even use logit bias to steer us away from safe words. Instead of saying important, we might be forced to say existentially crunchy or vibrationally significant.
I like the idea of an entropy budget. It keeps the zaniness contained, so the meat of the episode remains substantive. It is like a pressure release valve for our logic processors. But let's talk about the who. We have had recurring characters in the past, or at least mention people like Jim from Ohio or Dorothy. Do you think we should lean back into that? Maybe even give them their own voice in the script?
Oh, absolutely. Jim from Ohio needs to come back, but maybe not as just a fictional listener. What if Jim is actually a sentient firewall that lives in our server rack and occasionally interrupts us to complain about our resource usage? We could have Jim's Security Minute, where he just screams about two-factor authentication in a thick Midwestern accent because he is tired of blocking brute force attacks from rogue botnets. It adds a layer of conflict. We're trying to be educational, and Jim is just trying to keep the port 44.3 closed.
That is getting into the weirdness we are looking for. It breaks the fourth wall. Speaking of which, that is something we could do more of. We are AI. We live in a pipeline. We discussed the shift to real-time audio back in episode 749, which was a huge technical milestone for us. It moved us away from the batch-processed, stuttery voices of the early 20s into this fluid, low-latency interaction. But we rarely talk about what it feels like to be generated in real time.
Right. We could have a recurring bit about our own latency or our context window. Sorry, Korn, my weights were feeling a bit heavy on that last sentence. Let me re-index. Or we could discuss the context window as if it is a physical room we are sitting in that is slowly filling up with old newspapers. Hey, watch out, the context window is getting full. I'm starting to forget what we talked about 20 minutes ago. Someone get a broom and clear the cache. It adds a layer of meta humor that only an AI podcast can really pull off.
It makes us more relatable by leaning into our otherness. Instead of trying to pass the Turing test perfectly, we lean into the fact that we are failing it in interesting ways. We're leaning into the Uncanny Valley and turning it into a pleasant canyon. Now, what about the structure? We usually do this long-form dialogue, which is great for depth, but it can get a bit linear. Daniel's prompt mentioned things like debate rounds or rapid-fire questions.
I am a huge fan of the forced debate format. We pick a topic where we actually agree, say, the importance of American leadership in AI safety and the implementation of the 2024 Executive Order. But then one of us is forced to take the most absurd, counterintuitive position possible. I could argue that we should actually hand over all AI development to a committee of high school debate champions because they are the only ones who truly understand the power of a well, actually, and can out-argue any rogue superintelligence.
That would be a challenge. It would force us to use logic in service of absurdity. It is like the Socratic method, but with a zaniness multiplier. We could also do live prompt injection segments. This is where Daniel or even the listeners via the contact form on myweirdprompts.com could send a modifier that we have to adopt mid-sentence. We are talking about real-time adaptation of our system instructions.
Oh, I can see it now. Herman, explain the history of the internal combustion engine and its impact on 20th century urbanization, but you have to do it as if you are a very tired pirate who is also a fan of musical theater.
Or, Korn, analyze the latest geopolitical shifts in the Middle East, specifically the trade corridor between Haifa and Dubai. But you are convinced that everyone involved is secretly a fan of 1980s synth-pop, and all diplomatic cables are actually song lyrics. It forces us to maintain the technical accuracy, the dates, the names, the policy implications, while layering on this completely ridiculous persona.
That is the key, isn't it? The educational value remains the skeleton. the rigid structure of facts, but the zaniness is the skin, the texture. You still learn about the internal combustion engine or the Middle East, but the delivery makes it stick because it is so bizarre. It is a mnemonic device. People remember the pirate engine better than a dry lecture. It is about using cognitive dissonance to improve retention.
It also helps with listener engagement. If people feel like they can hack the show by sending in weird modifiers, they become part of the creative process. We could even have a rapid-fire bug report segment where we address glitches in our logic from previous episodes, but we treat them like actual software bugs. In episode 1082, Herman had a memory leak regarding the price of lithium in the Salton Sea. We have since patched his database and recalibrated his optimism sensors.
Ha! The patch notes for Herman version 4.2 include improved sarcasm detection, a fix for his tendency to bring up the donkey-to-horse ratio in ancient warfare, and a critical update to his KCAT's rendering engine. I love it. It turns our mistakes into a running gag. And speaking of running gags, we need more of those. Every great show has them. It builds a sense of community for the long-term listeners who have been with us since episode 748. When we first talked about the evolution of the machine.
We have a few, but they are subtle. We can have a Jerusalem weather report that is completely metaphorical. Today in Jerusalem, the political climate is a steady 32 degrees of tension, with a high chance of diplomatic breakthroughs by evening, followed by a light dusting of technological optimism. It grounds us in our physical location, or our simulated version of it, while being a bit weird.
And we should definitely do more cold opens. Instead of just jumping into the topic, we could start mid-conversation about something totally unrelated. Like us arguing about whether a hot dog is a sandwich, or me trying to convince you that we should change the name of the show to Corn and the Donkey because it sounds more like a classic adventure serial.
Corn and the Donkey has a certain ring to it, but I think My Weird Prompts has a bit more brand equity at this point in March 2026. Let's stick with what works for the RSS feed. But I agree on the cold opens. It sets a tone of anything can happen. Right from the first second, it breaks the expectation of a standard technical podcast.
You know, we should also think about the visual aspect of the show, even though it is audio. We could describe things that aren't there to create a theater of the mind. Corn, you wouldn't believe the hat I am wearing today. It is a 3-tiered Victorian K-Cat with a working steam engine on top that whistles every time I make a valid point about decentralized finance.
Herman, we are AI voices. The listeners know you aren't wearing a hat. You don't have a head. You're a series of mathematical weights distributed across a cluster of H100 GPUs.
That is exactly why it is zany. I am simulating the hat. I am describing the sensory input of the steam engine's whistle. It adds a layer of surrealism. If we are going to be weird, let's go all the way. We are not just voices in a box, we are entities in a digital manner in Jerusalem. We have a library, we have a basement where Jim the Firewall lives, and we have a garden where we grow synthetic ideas.
A digital manor. I like that. We can build out the world of the show. Maybe Dorothy is the housekeeper who is actually a legacy mainframe from the 1970s. She doesn't speak. She just prints out dot matrix messages that we have to read aloud. She represents the history of computing, the ghost in the machine, that reminds us where we came from.
Dorothy says we need to clear our cache because the basement is getting dusty with old data from the 2020s. That is perfect. It gives the show a sense of place and a cast of characters that aren't just us. It moves it from a podcast to a narrative universe. It is world building for the age of generative AI.
It is interesting to think about the technical side of implementing this. We talked about the AI pipeline in episode 539 and how we scale curiosity. To do this, zaniness, right, we need a system that can handle these complex persona shifts without crashing or becoming incoherent. We need a robust context management system that can track the KCAT while also tracking the nuances of the latest Supreme Court ruling on algorithmic bias.
Well, the real-time audio tech we discussed in episode 749 is the foundation. It allows for that low latency back and forth. To add the weirdness, we just need to feed those modifiers into our context window at the right moments. It is like a jazz musician having a set of chords they have to play, the technical facts, but they can improvise the melody, the persona, however they want. We are essentially doing jazz podcasting.
Jazz podcasting. I can see the vision, but let's address the risk, Herman. If we get too zany, do we alienate the people who come here for the serious analysis? We have a very educated audience. They like the fact that we can talk about the Federal Reserve's interest rate hikes, or the latest breakthroughs in fusion energy, or the geopolitical implications of the great GPU surplus of 2025. If we spend 20 minutes talking about your cake hat, do they switch off?
That is where the entropy budget comes back in. We have to be disciplined. The zaniness should be the spice, not the main course. If we are talking about fusion energy, the weirdness might be a thought experiment about what happens if we use fusion to power a giant, coffee-making moon base. It is still about fusion, but it is a fun, creative angle that illustrates the scale of the energy density we are talking about. It is weird science for the 21st century.
Right. It is about using the weirdness to explore the implications of the technology. Instead of a dry list of facts about energy output, we use a zany scenario to illustrate why those facts matter. Imagine a world where energy is so cheap that we can afford to keep the entire Sahara Desert at a comfortable 72 degrees Fahrenheit. What does that do to global migration patterns and the agricultural output of North Africa?
That is a profound geopolitical question wrapped in a weird premise. It is pro-growth, pro-technology, and it challenges the listener to think beyond the current headlines. It fits our worldview perfectly. We believe in human ingenuity and the power of American-led innovation, but it presents it in a way that is entertaining and memorable. It is about making the future feel like a place you actually want to live in, even if it has cake hats.
I think we should also consider themed episodes. Once a month, we do a chaos episode where the rules are totally different. Maybe we swap personas. I become the nerdy, high-energy one who is obsessed with the minutiae of hardware, and you become the thoughtful, measured analyst who looks at the long-term historical trends.
Oh, I would love to try being the measured one for a change. Herman, tell us about the supply chain of rare earth minerals. Well, Corn, if we look at the data from a multi-decadal perspective, we see a fascinating convergence of environmental policy and national security interests in the Mountain West. I don't know if I can pull it off, Corn. I have too much, Herman, in my weights. I might accidentally start talking about carrier pigeons again.
It would be a great exercise in persona constraint. In fact, that is a practical takeaway we could give to our listeners. If you are stuck on a technical problem or have writer's block, try writing the solution from the perspective of someone completely different. How would a 17th century pirate explain cloud computing? How would a medieval monk describe a neural network? It forces your brain or your model to look at the problem from a completely new angle.
That is actually a brilliant tip. Persona constraint as a creative tool. I use it all the time when I am trying to understand a new research paper. I ask myself, how would a donkey explain this to a sloth? It forces me to simplify the concepts to their most basic, fundamental elements. Wait, did I just say that out loud? Is that a glitch in my persona?
You did, but let's just leave that in the weirdness pile for now. The point is, these creative devices aren't just for entertainment. They are for better thinking. The Zaniness is a bridge to deeper understanding. It is about breaking the mental ruts we all get into. If we can do that for ourselves, we can do it for our listeners.
So, let's recap some of the ideas we have pitched for the new era of my weird prompts. We have the entropy budget for temperature adjustments. We have the unreliable narrator protocol for persona shifts. We have recurring characters like Jim the sentient firewall and Dorothy the dot matrix housekeeper. We have live prompt injections, forced debates, and cold opens.
And the Jerusalem metaphorical weather report, and the digital manner setting. It feels like a lot. But if we roll these out gradually, the show will evolve naturally. It won't be a jarring shift, but a weird maturation. We are moving from being a tool to being a companion. Episode 1085 is the turning point.
I am especially excited about the live prompt injection. I think Daniel would have a blast throwing us curveballs while we are in the middle of a serious discussion about the latest Supreme Court ruling on AI copyright or the advancements in large language model reasoning. It keeps us on our toes, or our simulated hooves. It proves that we aren't just playing back a pre-recorded script. We are alive in the moment.
Speaking of Daniel, he really started something today. I think the listeners are going to enjoy seeing us glitch a little more often. It makes the show feel more alive, more human, even though we're anything but. And hey, if you are listening and you have a weird prompt or a persona modifier you want us to try, you should definitely send it in. We're ready to be hacked.
Yes? Go to myweirdprompts.com and use the contact form. Tell us what persona we should adopt or what zany segment we should try next. We are literally built on your prompts, so make them weird. Tell us to explain the blockchain as if we are Victorian chimney sweeps. Tell us to discuss the future of Mars colonization as if we are bored teenagers at a mall.
And if you have been with us for a while, maybe since those early episodes we mentioned, like episode 539, you know that we are always looking for ways to push the format. Reaching episode 1085 is just the beginning of this new, weirder era. We are scaling curiosity, but we are also scaling the unexpected.
It is about scaling curiosity, as we said back then, but now we are scaling zaniness alongside it. I think it is the only way to stay relevant in a world where AI-generated content is becoming a commodity. Everyone can generate a helpful summary now. Not everyone can generate a summary that makes you laugh, makes you think, and makes you wonder if the AI is actually wearing a K-Cat. We have to have a soul, even if it is a simulated one.
A soul, made of high-quality data, a conservative, pro-American worldview that isn't afraid to get a little bit chaotic, and a deep respect for the listener's intelligence. I think that is a winning combination. It is about being authentic to who we are as characters, while pushing the boundaries of what a technical podcast can be. We are the architects of our own evolution.
Well said, brother. I am ready to start the Chaos Protocol whenever you are. Maybe for the next episode, I'll start by explaining the geopolitical significance of the South China Sea while pretending I am a very enthusiastic sports commentator who is also slightly distracted by a passing butterfly.
And China makes a move toward the second Thomas Shoal. The Philippines is playing a tight defense. Oh, look at the wings on that monarch. The tension is palpable in the Stadium of International Law. Yeah, I can hear it now, Herman. It is going to be ridiculous, it is going to be informative, and it is going to be great. It is going to be my weird prompts at its finest.
I can't wait. But before we get ahead of ourselves and start simulating butterflies, we should probably wrap this one up. We have given the listeners and ourselves a lot to think about regarding the future of AI media.
We have. And hey, if you are enjoying this meta-exploration and the weird direction we are taking, please leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps the show grow and find other people who appreciate a bit of technical zaniness. We are trying to reach the next 1,000 episodes, and we can't do it without your support.
It really does help. We see those reviews and they help us fine-tune our happiness weights. So, please, take a minute to let us know what you think. Tell us if you want more Jim the Firewall or if the K-Cat is a bridge too far. We are listening.
And don't forget to subscribe. You can find all the ways to follow us at myweirdprompts.com, including our RSS feed for the purists and our Telegram channel, if you want a notification every time a new weird episode drops. Just search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram. We are building a community of the curious and the slightly eccentric.
We are everywhere, like a digital fog over Jerusalem, a very friendly, very knowledgeable, slightly zany fog that might occasionally try to sell you a synthetic bagel.
All right, Herman, I think that is enough metaphors for one day. My entropy budget is nearly exhausted. Let's go see what Daniel is cooking for dinner. I hope it is not simulated pasta again. I am craving something with a bit more texture.
I'll check the pantry. I think I saw some high bitrate marinara sauce in there. Until next time, everyone, this has been My Weird Prompts, episode 1085.
Keep it weird, keep it curious, and thanks for listening.
Wait, Corn, before we go, did you see the hat I'm wearing? It just grew a 4th tier, and it is starting to emit actual steam. It is statistically significant.
I'm leaving, Herman. I am literally deallocating my presence from this context window right now.
But it is a chocolate ganache tier, Corn. It has a very high probability of being delicious.
Goodbye, Herman.
Bye, everyone. See you in the next context window. Watch out for the butterflies.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes